I think we look at, the idea of Trump's unpredictability. It did work for him first time round. Okay, maybe we were lucky, but maybe the very fact that you didn't know how Trump was going to respond meant that allies needed to be kept on their toes, as it were, and contribute, and enemies needed to be careful about the moves they made in case they antagonized him. And we've got plenty of examples of what happened. I mean, Bashar al-Assad, when he used chemical weapons very early on in the Trump administration, the response of Trump was not to do what Obama did, not take action. He took action. He fired cruise missiles at Assad's forces. So that was an immediate reaction. At the end of his administration, when the Iranians had repeatedly, targeted American bases in Iraq and other places, what was Trump's response? It wasn't, a gentle, oh, we'll tolerate it. It was, I'm going to kill Qasem Soleimani, Iran's terrorist in chief. So the point is that did, and what was Iran's response after that? It was to, curl up into a ball and cry, basically. So the reality is that the unpredictability of Trump, not knowing where he sits on certain issues, makes it a dangerous proposition for allies to cross him, but an even more dangerous proposition for enemies to try their luck. And we've seen in the last 4 years enemies trying their luck across the world in various places, whether it's Putin in Ukraine, Xi rattling sabers in Taiwan, Iran igniting regional war in the Middle East, many other examples as well. I suspect that there'll be an early test for Trump, and he will respond unpredictably, and that may well set the tone for all other tests going forward. Well, I think I wasn't surprised he won because I've been in the US actually the last week and saw there was significant support for him. I think everyone was surprised at the extent of the victory, in the sense that he, has won all the swing states and the popular vote, and looks like Republicans are going to carry everything downstream as well. So I think the extent of it did surprise people, but the result wasn't particularly in doubt, I felt, although you could see why some pollsters were wary of predicting, given they got it wrong. But of course, they got it wrong again by sitting on the fence. So I think, look, there are clear questions about, again, how polling happens. Very few pollsters got this right, and clearly, whenever there's a Trump election, people are undercounting his support. That's obvious. The fact that he was basically level pegging in most polls before this should have told us he was going to win, because in both 2020 and 2016, he outperformed his polls. So anyone who looked at history as a guide would have probably predicted this, I think. Well, the first thing to suggest is, with Donald Trump, is always expect the unexpected. I mean, there is no new normal per se. We need to firstly see who goes into the Trump cabinet, who will be Secretary of State, who will be Secretary of Defense, for example, who might handle trade matters, another kind of important point, because that will give you a clue, I think, about where the Trump administration is going to position itself. And I thought, it was interesting already, in contrast to some of the wilder rhetoric we've heard from Trump over the last few months. His victory speech was actually quite calm, quite reasoned, quite reasonable. And I think, people shouldn't jump to conclusions about what the Trump administration might lend itself to, and should be open to working with the Trump administration and to helping shape the global future. The one thing we learned, I think, from the first Trump term is that those people who were open to working with President Trump and his team tended to get things done and tended to see progress. Those who put themselves in opposition to President Trump and his team tended to see their agendas crushed as a result. So I think the lesson is that one has to work with the administration. One has to then, try and make progress on the issues that you feel are important outside in the broader world, and see if you can bring the administration along with you in your approach that way. But it's a complicated dance that's going to have to take place for many people around the world now. That applies both to allies and enemies, of course. Because, of course, there is uncertainty. The uncertainty stems from the pledges to end the war in 24, 48 hours, of course, and nobody knows what that means in practical terms. There's been obviously skittishness towards US support for Ukraine from the Trump camp. Rhetorically, and also, of course, in the fight to get through additional aid to Ukraine earlier this year, which was rather painful because Donald Trump was against it, essentially, the supplementary sort of allocations. So there is a lot to digest straight away. But set against that, of course, I think what Zelensky has done is very clever. He's come out straight out saying, I recognize the win. I delight in Donald Trump coming in because you believe in the same things as I do. We believe in peace through strength, and you're going to get the chance to show what that means now in that way. And that's Zelensky coming out very early and laying out his stall, which is I'm going to try and work with you. And I get what you want to do, which is end this war. Guess what? I want to end this war too. I'm going to try and convince you that the way to end this war is to give me everything that I need to end it really quickly, rather than a forced negotiation that's going to lead nowhere, and which won't actually end the conflict and will actually do your own strategic position a lot of harm. So, while there is obviously concern about where the US might now sit on Ukraine, I think once again it's about Ukraine and other allies engaging early and strongly with the Trump team and trying to suggest that there is a way through here, which doesn't involve abandoning Ukraine, but instead involves piling the pressure on Vladimir Putin. NATO is going to have to do more, as we know. I mean, NATO is going to have to do more about supplying its own defense in addition to American defense here. That's going to be a no a no-brainer under Trump. It's going to be you're going to need to spend the money that you started spending in the first term, then sort of went on a bit of a hiatus. Now you're going to have to spend it for real, because if you want the US to be engaged, you're going to have to show that you're pulling your weight. So the first step is for NATO to take more responsibility, or rather the European partners of NATO to take more responsibility for their own defense by virtue of restocking their militaries. And frankly, that's a good thing. It's a good thing because Europe needs to wake up to the realities of the world as is in 2024, not the world they thought they were living in for the past 30 years. It's no longer the peace dividend. That's over. It's now back to the age of nasty, brutish wars in this sort of setup. And the European mainland needs to defend itself more in that way. So I think, there will be a bumpy relationship to begin with NATO, because Trump will demand NATO do its bit, and NATO countries will have to respond to that or risk being cut off and out. But if we're serious about making this an alliance that actually works for the 21st century and one that has real heft and power, all European countries should be welcoming the idea of spending more on defense, because that's going to enable us to be more prepared for the threats that are coming our way. As for the Trump-Putin relationship, well, they didn't really have a massive, bromance the first time round. Yes, there were some entreaties, there were some discussions. I'm sure Putin will try and make some, movement towards Trump. But the problem for Putin is that Trump comes to these things with his own ideas, and they're unlikely to accord with Putin's ideas. And Putin will want, if he wants a negotiated peace out of this, he wants to win through a negotiated peace. And that may not be where Trump sees the deal being, as it were. And that may lead to conflict, of course, between Russia and the US. And we shouldn't forget that there was an example in the first Trump term of a country that he tried to do a deal with, North Korea, who then annoyed him by trying to take too much in the deal, and what did he do? He just walked away, and they were dead to him afterwards. So there are risks for Putin in this debate. It's by no means a slam dunk that Putin comes in, phones up Trump, they do a deal to end the war, and it all ends in Putin's way. There's a great danger for Putin that ends up with Trump and Putin falling out completely, and that will mean a lot of pressure on Putin as well.